Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition here of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in to today's edition of the show. Happy Thursday to you all here on this great Thursday afternoon. To start things off, as always, we're going to be talking about our Week 14 general prop bets. We now get to look at Sunday's slate of games after looking at Thursday Night Football yesterday. We're talking about some injuries around the league that occurred whether last weekend or several weeks ago, and continue to update you guys on them and also give you some concerning fantasy implications for them as well. I'm going to make some picks for the weekend, some of the weekend's biggest games. I'm going to update you on the NFL MVP odds. This one seems to be a little bit more unsettled than that of the Heisman, so I thought it would be a little bit more fun. And then we conclude today's show with my Sunday Night Football betting preview. Big one in the AFC West. Could this be a potential changing of the guard between the Chargers and the Chiefs in that division? But before we get into any of that good stuff, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to, like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network. If you want to view more exclusive content such as this or any other shows, you can also go to our website, gsmcpodcast.net, or other websites as well to check us out. Great things to my great people here at the network. But if you want to interact more directly with our shows, please make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show as always. You can go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, and or a comment, question, or concern you have, or just do it right here through YouTube. It's a great way to get your opinions out there. Just makes the show that much better. And I love hearing from you, my faithful audience, all the time, and it just makes this show, like I always say, really come to life. But without further ado, let us jump right into our first segment of the day, starting off with our Week 14 prop bets. Now, like yesterday, this is about the players here. This is about betting on certain players and certain matchups that I really believe are going to hit for you this weekend, whether it be because they're in a slump or whether it be they are overachieving expectations right now. And looking at this weekend slate, it felt a little bit easier to determine where things could go wrong for certain players and where things could go exactly the way you want them to in terms of a betting perspective. So even though there's not many exciting ones, I tried to get some long shots out there, starting off with the first one. How about a quarterback who has been kind of struggling? We always said this about him, that if he loses a lot of weapons in his offense, chances are he's going to struggle more and more, and that is Brock Purdy. This is an interesting match against the Bears. Yes, it feels like the Bears are a team kind of in flux right now, well, with the firing of Matt Eberflus, the instating of Thomas Brown as your new head coach in terms of the interim, maybe potentially in the future as well if he succeeds. And this one certainly feels like it shouldn't be a trap game, right? Because sometimes teams really react very well to an interim head coach, but the Bears, even with, when Thomas Brown was the OC and Caleb was playing better than he had over those poor 3 weeks prior to this good stretch of form for him, I still think this Bears team will find ways to shoot itself in the foot. But in terms of shooting yourself in the foot, there's no team worse than the 49ers right now, who just do it not because of general style of play, but because of injuries. The injury bug really ravaged them, and that's why I feel like Brock Purdy has not found the success he would like this season. That's why in this matchup against a very tough Bears defense, which I have to give a lot of credit to, I'm going to say he hits the under here in terms of passing yards at 229.5 at minus 137. I really don't necessarily think that this matchup is going to be favorable to someone who is kind of reeling right now in terms of lack of weapons. Yes, there are exciting young players there, but it certainly feels like the time bomb is ticking for the 49ers right now. And this may be the last several games that most of these players are playing together as a unit. And that's kind of scary if you're a 49ers fan thinking about that, but it looks more and more relevant as the season goes on for the 49ers. And Brock Purdy's going to have to grow up quick, if that is the case. And it will start sometime soon. And chances are he may not rise to the occasion to start off. I do still want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but chances are, for the time being, if he doesn't have those superstar level weapons, then he's going to look a little bit more mortal than usual. Now let's go to running back, who I think in this second opportunity against a division rival is going to prove himself, prove that he's going to be an X factor in this division's outcome, and truly want to redeem that kind of tepid performance 2 weeks ago. It's James Conner. And I feel like, now that Seattle and Arizona have now played each other, understood each other, watched more film on each other, and have always played each other over these past couple of years, and for many years, we now know what our Arizona Cardinals game plan on the offense side of the football should be. It should be focused around James Conner, because if there's one real weakness of the Seattle defense, I do believe it's its run defense. I feel like the secondary is rounding into form. There's more communication there. And at least from the linebacking core onwards, that part of the field in terms of defense is pretty much covered. It's that defensive front I'm kind of worried about. Yes, Leonard Williams is there, but it's going to be about corralling a guy like James Conner, not having him going. Because if James Conner is going, then Kyler Murray gets settled down, and you don't want that. However, James Conner is going to have a much bigger say in this win or lose for Arizona. So that's why I'm picking the over here at 65.5 rush yards for him, because he's not going to disappoint again. He's going to want to state the Cardinals' intent by truly taking it to that Seattle front and trying his best to help his offense out, because that's what they're going to need. They're going to need timely possessions that take time off the clock, allow Kyler Murray to get in a rhythm, and put points on the board. And so that's why this time around, I'm not necessarily going to say that James Conner is going to be shut down again, because you can't necessarily stop a good running back twice in a span of 3 weeks, coming back from a cross-country trip from New York, mind you, where you looked pretty mortal there. So that's why in this one, James Conner is going to have a much bigger say in its outcome. In terms of receivers, I really don't think George Pickens is going to have a good day. And it kind of seems cliche to say that, because him and Russ have really come into their own in that Steelers offense, and I'm really, really happy that that relationship has grown and matured these past couple of weeks, and it could be a potent one come postseason time. But in this matchup, let me check, because I do believe they're playing the Eagles. I just want to make sure here. No, they're playing the Browns. That one's and this is a game we saw 2 weeks ago in the snow, where they were a little bit tentative in terms of taking deep shots. Maybe that's not the case in this one, because the weather is not going to be as terrible in this one. But I still think George Pickens is going to have a tough day against the Browns, the defense that's still playing for pride. That performance against Denver was not entirely their fault. Yes, they had some bad moments, but most of them stemmed down from the offense's mistakes, more so than defensive struggles. So that's why I feel like the Browns, in another opportunity to take the Steelers down a peg, are going to try and get very physical with George Pickens yet again, much like their first matchup. And so that's why I'm taking the under in terms of George Pickens' receiving yard total at 68.5. I just think that even though he's been performing out of his mind these past couple of weeks with Russ, I think these are the kinds of games where you might have to reconsider, because this is another opportunity for the Browns to continue this momentum that they're having that started from that game against Pittsburgh at home in the snow 2 weeks ago. And so I would definitely be scared if I'm Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin in terms of scheming George Pickens open, because that's going to be tough against this very spirited Browns defense. So overall, those are the three kind of top prop bets I wanted to bring to you in terms of guys who might overachieve or underachieve. But a couple fun ones that I wanted to throw in here. How about Bryce Young and his rejuvenated state, hitting the over in terms of passing yards in his game against, I'm forgetting who these teams are playing here. Let me pull it up real quick. Against the Eagles here, how about him hitting the over? And I know it sounds crazy because it's the toughest game they've played in this stretch where we've seen Bryce Young really come into his own and truly be a vocal leader of this team. But why not? I feel like at this point in time, we're starting to see a confident Bryce Young no matter the opponent. He nearly beat the Chiefs. He led a very gutsy game-tying drive to take that game into overtime, which not many people can do against that Chiefs team, and not many people get the opportunity to do because, well, they're the Chiefs and they're one of the best closing teams in the NFL. But enough about that, and let's talk about the special traits that Bryce Young has developed. He can perform out of structure, and that game-tying touchdown against the Bucs proved that much. He can perform in pressure situations. Both of those drives were 2-minute drills. He's really improved in terms of seeing and processing the field, not necessarily missing wide open throws like he did early in the season, and really reading the field very well and understanding the accuracy of his certain passes and where they need to go. And so that's what I admire about Bryce Young's development. And yes, this Eagles defense is a very scary one for a guy who is just getting into the feel of the NFL again. But Bryce Young has proven he is dauntless. And so that's why I feel like the over is not necessarily a long shot here for him. And then finally, Jonnu Smith at the tight end position. Another guy who's overachieving, much like Bryce Young is right now. I'm taking the over in their game against the Jets. I feel like Jonnu Smith is going to continue to see his star rise in that offense because he is their secret weapon. He's not the speediest of guys like Tyreek Hill or Devon Achane. He is not necessarily the smartest of route runners in certain situations like Jalen Waddle can be, but he is a reliable tight end and a reliable target. And we've seen it in this offense, and I think he's going to continue to grow. Even if the Dolphins make the playoffs, he's going to be a huge part of this season down the stretch, and that's why I'm really excited to see what he does. I'm going to take the over on him as well. But that's just about do it for my prop bets. Let me know which ones you like in the comments below, or if you have any of your own. But coming up next, we're going to talk about the dark side of fantasy a little bit. Talk about how injuries will impact your decision making this week in terms of fantasy implications. We'll be right back to talk about it right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, if you do wish to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly while we live stream, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way as always to contribute and interact to the shows. I love hearing your opinions and comments you leave. It's all about you, the audience, this show. I want to get your opinions out there as much as I want mine out there as well. You can also leave a tip or donation as well through our website or through YouTube, clicking that Super Chat button and that $sign in the comments section below. It's a great way as well to contribute to the network and all we do here, and it's greatly appreciated in advance. Without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of the day here on today's show, talking about kind of the dark side of fantasy football. Let's talk injuries here. A lot of big ones occurred through the past couple of weeks. A lot of pretty brutal ones to watch, I must say. But overall, it's part of the game. And it's part of how you need to make certain decisions and analyze certain situations as well. And it's never fun to talk about, but it's important in terms of understanding the depth of certain positions and in terms of finding out ways to leverage certain situations as well. And all of these players are going to be dearly missed for their teams, and they create different dynamics because of their injuries within their teams as a result. But all of them could also be seen as lending opportunities to certain combinations, certain tandems really coming to life again. And I know it kind of sounds weird and harrowing to talk about guys who are injured being kind of quote-unquote blessings, and I never want to interpret it that way. But from a fantasy perspective, you kind of have to look at certain situations a bit more positively, because this could make space for an unsung hero to arise. And while we wish these guys the speediest of recoveries, and we never like to see injuries in the National Football League, this is a time in the fantasy football season where you have to be proactive. And so this segment is very important in terms of interpreting certain injuries. Without further ado, let's jump right in, starting off with probably the worst one of the weekend. Trevor Lawrence going down from that brutal hit from Azeez Al-Shaair. Obviously, the NFL subsequently suspending Al-Shaair for 3 games, and a fallout from that we can talk about as well, but for a different day. But concerning this injury, it's smart of the Jags to bench Trevor for the rest of the season, or put him on IR for that matter, for the rest of the season, because they want to preserve the integrity of the piece they have. That's their saving grace. Because let's face it, the Jags are a miserable franchise right now. They're 2-10. The owner, the coach, nothing's going right for them. And so, preserving Trevor Lawrence for next season, hopefully bringing in new blood in the head coaching system, and other personnel options as well, maybe getting rid of GMs and what have you, I feel like that's the right choice. In terms of fantasy implications, this team was never really an appealing one in the first place. Maybe a lot of people were high on either Brian Thomas Jr., the exciting rookie who could have brought out the best in Trevor, but really not necessarily too many glimpses of that combination really working out. And maybe Gabe Davis coming there from Buffalo as an experienced receiver. And he's had a pretty rough season, in fact, injured himself right now. But I am pretty excited and intrigued to see how this Mac Jones, Parker Washington development plays out. Because Mac Jones, let's be honest, he's not going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar next season. Maybe some team picks him up on a minimum contract and he's a bridge quarterback somewhere, or he's a competent backup for another team. But this development is pretty nice in terms of people wanting to be proactive out on the waiver wire, because they really looked pretty good against a solid defense in the Texans last week. And so I would be confident in saying that Jacksonville, yes, is not appealing, but if you want to be proactive, look into that partnership for the time being. Yes, it may not help you in playoff times, but say you're a middle-of-the-pack team and you want to make more additions to ensure your place in the fantasy playoffs. Pick up a guy like Parker Washington or Mac Jones in a deeper league, and potentially you could hit your goals for the season, achieve your goals, potentially make a deep playoff run with them. But this injury, while very worrying in real life, maybe not as much so from a fantasy standpoint. Let's talk about a bizarre injury next here. How about Michael Dickson, the Seattle Seahawks punter, going down with a back tightening of some sort, potentially back spasms? He should be okay for this match with the Cardinals, but if he isn't, this is why this injury is finally very important from a fantasy perspective, because a lot of people might be looking at the Seahawks defense and saying, hey, this could be a nice little waiver wire pickup. They've been playing pretty well over these past couple of weeks. They've been scoring defensive touchdowns over these past couple of weeks. So let me take a look at them. The problem is special teams tie in as well. And Seattle has proved that they're pretty bad in certain situations in special teams. And if Michael Dickson is not himself, he's only, say, even 65 to 75% in this game against Arizona, it's not going to look pretty for the special teams side of that combination. Because remember, defense and special teams are a 2-for-1 package. Yes, you can really like the look of a defense, but you have to trust that the special teams don't mess up. And I can't necessarily say that about Seattle as a fan myself right now. Because as much as I love this defense, and this defense has been doing its job, the special teams look shaky. And if one of those players is injured, like Dixon, then chances are this team starts to lose a little bit of its appeal as well down the stretch, especially if they get into the playoffs. And you're in the fantasy playoffs and you're trusting this Seattle defense to pull through for you. You also have to worry about the special teams. And that's why I wanted to bring this one to light, even though it's a little bit more bizarre and probably won't have much impact as I necessarily think. But another one that's truly been a huge impact on and off the field in real life and fantasy, J.K. Dobbins. I feel like this one has truly hit the Los Angeles Chargers pretty roughly. I feel like this injury really impacts the style of play that the Chargers are wanting to employ. And looking at this team right now, they're reeling because of it. They don't necessarily have trust in that many players outside of Gus Edwards now. They gave some touches to Kamani Vidal. He didn't perform well. And so this running attack now looks more mortal than what it was with J.K. Dobbins, where they were just imposing their will against opposing defenses. And so that's what concerns me, because I was someone who was high on this Chargers backfield. I was high on a guy like Kamani Vidal. Thought he was going to get meaningful touches. But now, the fact that, it came at this point in the season when the Chargers were battling for a playoff spot throws a wrench in your entire operation if you're the LA Chargers. Now you're really back up against it. And with the point game we're going to be talking about at the end of the show against the Chiefs coming up, you really don't want your offense to not show up in that one, because you're going to need to put up points on the board against the Chiefs if you want to win that game. So this one is really detrimental, not just in fantasy and how you have to look at this Chargers running back room now, but also in real life, because they don't have a guy like J.K. Dobbins. Maybe Gus Edwards can be that down the stretch, but J.K. Dobbins truly revolutionized what this offense was able to do under Jim Harbaugh. And now we're starting to see the difficulties without him. And so that's why that's important. To another injury, maybe not as important right now because his team isn't suffering without him by any means. Devontae Smith kind of been in and out of this lineup over these past couple of weeks with a hamstring injury. And not for nothing, though, everyone loves this Eagles team from a fantasy standpoint, no matter who's injured on it, because chances are this is going to be a well-oiled machine, even if one of their guys goes down. I would say the only guy who that doesn't necessarily apply to is Saquon, just because he is mostly 75% of this offense. But, it is kind of weird seeing a guy like Devontae Smith go down, because a lot of people might have felt like this was his year to truly stand out in this Eagles offense. Maybe supplant A.J. Brown even as the wide receiver one, but it hasn't been the case. And so this is something to monitor throughout Devontae Smith's career, whether or not injuries will really slow down his development. But he still is an intriguing receiver when he's healthy, just because in that offensive lineup, a lot of people are going to get a lot of production. So I don't necessarily think that when he even comes back, he's going to suffer. But it is something to note in his development and maturation within this offense that could be concerning on the stretch. And last but not least, this one's always a tough one. Christian McCaffrey. We have to talk about this because a lot of people were saying Christian McCaffrey, this is his year. He's going to remain healthy. And then even before the season starts, even before some of you might have picked him number 1 overall in their drafts, you had the tendonitis issue, you had the ACL issue, now we have the torn PCL, and he's out for the season. And so this does not bode well for the 49ers, but also potentially for fantasy football managers, because a lot of people actually liked the fact that new stars were emerging in San Fran early in the season when this happened. Jordan Mason, Garendo, Jawan Jennings. All these people who you invested a lot of worth into in terms of picking them up and seeing what they could do, and you reap the benefits from them. But now this just feels like a team too broken to really piece that magic back together. I'm not indicting these players. They're still special players in their own right. But this team feels a lot different from what it was early in the season when they were at least more hopeful than where they are now. And that can play a huge difference into how production is affected in this 49ers squad, because Christian McCaffrey was obviously going to be a star, the focal point of that 49ers offense had he been healthy throughout the season. And now that you're 5-7 and you don't have him for the rest of the season, that complicates things. So even though it's never a fun injury to talk about, this is the time to kind of nix hope in the 49ers for the rest of the season, even though it sounds very weird considering where a lot of these replacement players were at the start of the season compared to now. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, because injuries are always tough to navigate. Let me know if you need any advice as well. Let me know if you have any other injuries you want to talk about. But coming up next, we're making some all-important picks from some of the weekend's biggest games, a lot of divisional rivalries to determine in our next segment. So we'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day, going to be making my all-important picks and predictions for the biggest games of the weekend. A lot of divisional rivalries, just a lot of intriguing heavyweight matchups as well. But these 4 games could be season-defining for certain teams. Maybe in different manners, but all together, all 4 of them mean something, at the very least to me, when I look at this weekend's slate of games. Because of the fact all of these teams have a shot at pulling off wins. And so, that's the point that I'm trying to make here. I want to make this segment as fair as possible, but I also want to highlight games that might go under the radar outside of potentially the top games you might be monitoring this weekend as well. So without further ado, let's start off with kind of one of the more under the radar games of the weekend, maybe more for external issues for at least one of these teams rather than on the field play. But the Jets and the Dolphins is just a game that I'm really intrigued by. Dolphins 6.5-point favorites, but I feel like with all the off the field issues, you could justify this spread being a bit higher for the Dolphins. However, I'm going to say that this divisional matchup is one that could go either way. And I feel kind of funny saying that just because the Dolphins feel like the better team right now, and they're definitely playing more cohesively. But the Jets are one of those teams that I feel like can find moments in games where their offense becomes unplayable. In certain situations, say the run game, the short passing game perhaps, I see glimpses of what this offense could have been this season, and it's just a matter of sustaining it, and against a divisional opponent, that could be the impetus for this offense to really get going. And so, seeing as to how, like I said, divisional games are always tricky, and I always say that, the Jets could cover here. I'm going to pick them to cover here. I'm going to pick them to cover the spread, not necessarily convincingly, because I still do believe the Dolphins have more juice to their attack. They're more fluid, and they have more opportunities to put up points in bunches with that offense. But I got to give the Jets at least a chance here, because when they play well on the offense side of the football, I like what I see. And while it's few and far between, and Aaron Rodgers looks like his 40-year-old self, and they're not necessarily getting Breece Hall the ball as much, and he's missing open receivers, when those things get compensated for, when everything does click, and you can sustain certain drives, you can put points on the board, most importantly, sometimes win the time of possession or field position battle like they did against Seattle, then you can cover a spread. Maybe not win outright, but you can keep a game close. And divisional games are always close. So it's a tough one to pick here, but I think the Jets will cover just because of the fact that there's a chance that we can see some good moments from them, even if it's only in spots and spurts. But then let's talk about the Sunday Night Football game. We're going to talk about it a little bit more at length for our final segment. Chargers-Chiefs here. Always going to be an intriguing one. And this one's going to come down to the play of the Chargers offense without, like I said, J.K. Dobbins at its helm. And I feel like, Justin Herbert's one of those guys who bought into this Harbaugh philosophy and might struggle a little bit and prove that he could struggle in the game against Atlanta without a solid foundation in his backfield. But he still is one of my favorite quarterbacks, still is a competent quarterback who can lead an offense no matter what. He did it admirably under the Brandon Staley regime. And now, with Jim Harbaugh, it's going to be a lot tougher because he got so used to it. But he still has that shock element to him, and you still have to account for his dual threat abilities as well. And going against this Chiefs team that really isn't that special in any one metric. I know a lot of people are saying their defense is elite, and it still kind of is, but they're not necessarily dominant in any one phase of their game right now. They're kind of middling, and it is one of those games where you still want to favor them. They are, in fact, 3.5-point favorites according to Vegas. I feel like the Chargers could cover here. It's going to come down, yes, to their defensive play, because I don't necessarily feel the offense will have enough to put up points consistently on the board. But if they win the field position battle, if the Chargers force turnovers early and often, then they can keep themselves in this one. It could be a tighter game than a lot of people think in a defensive standpoint, but I do think I like the Chargers covering here. I still think the Chiefs win, and I'm a little bit apprehensive to say that, but it does feel like there's going to be some quote-unquote changing of the guard moments there, like I alluded to when I opened today's show in this matchup, just because I do believe the Chargers are sneaking up on the Chiefs in terms of AFC West supremacy. And we could see elements of that, but not completely, just because that J.K. Dobbins injury was pretty rattling to them in this game. So I'm going to pick the Chargers to cover, but not to win, unfortunately. Now let's talk about another one of the games of the week. Potentially number 2 in my mind in terms of games of the week, right behind Packers-Lions, just because it's an intra-conference game. And one of these teams hasn't been consistent enough for me to say they can spring the upset. It's Bills-Rams. Bills 4.5 points favorites here. And as much as I want to like this Rams team, as much as both sides of the football can be the scariest in the entire National Football League, the offense and the defense, once they're hot, they're hot. I still think the Bills are the better team here, the more experienced team, and most importantly, the most comfortable team right now. I feel like there's a certain comfort level there with the Bills and what they're able to do and how effectively they can do it, because they can play in so many different styles. They're so physical, yet so explosive that you can't really slow them down in any one aspect of their game. They're always on their game, and they're always going to want to attack you, whether in one way or another. And so I don't necessarily feel like this Rams team, who still doesn't necessarily have a true identity yet, is going to fare well in this one. I do think the Bills will win this one outright, and I do think they can win this one by more than, say, 10 points. Just because, as much as I respect what the Rams can be, I don't know what they will be any given week. And that's something that I don't want to say, and I don't often say about teams that are still very much in the playoff picture, but have a lot of work to do. And so that's why the Bills in this matchup, to me, really are standing out. And I do think that in terms of how this game could play out, the Rams will earn a lot of people's respect. They will prove that they can still hang tough with the league's elite. Because at the end of the day, the Rams still have that feel, that mold of the playoff team last year. And so I feel like there will be moments in this game where we see glimpses of what the Rams can be potentially over a 60-minute football game, but unfortunately it's only going to be for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So it's not going to be anything too comprehensive we see out of the Rams. I am giving them the benefit of the doubt, but the Bills right now are just a better team playing the better football. And so that's why the Bills, yes, it's cliche to pick them, but I do think that you have to at this point in time, just because the Rams right now are a little bit too scattershot. And the last game they want to talk about, let's go back 2 weeks. Well, not really, because they're playing again this weekend. It's the Browns and the Steelers. Steelers 6.5-point favorites here. But you know what I think about this game. And while it's tough to justify it, I just feel like the Browns are motivated to spoil their division. Yes, you know, in some games they fail to show up in certain aspects, and as a result, they falter when they should potentially have won, much like they did against Denver. But against the AFC North, there's something about this team that comes alive. They're truly spirited and motivated to derail the hopes of their divisional rivals more than any other teams in the NFL. And while it's certainly not the best plan for your own team's development, it certainly is fun to watch. I love the Browns, an exciting spoiler team. They went from one of the more unlikable teams in the National Football League to one of the most likable teams. And while this isn't about likability, there are certain factors here that really makes me think that that could play a big part of it too. Because at this point in time, you know, anything could go wrong for any team in the AFC at any point. And the Steelers feel like they're one of the more vulnerable elite teams, right? Because while, you know, this offense can get going any time, as they did last week against Cincinnati, we know what this defense can do. Chances are, in this matchup, yet again, we're not going to see the best of it. And I feel like it's going to be because the Browns just suck you into their game plan early. And Jameis does the best job of announcing himself early in games by saying, hey, I'm Jameis Winston and this is my game. I'm going to be aggressive and I'm going to throw the football deep on the field. And I don't know if the Steelers are going to be able to cope with that yet again, even though they saw it 2 weeks ago, albeit in more inclement conditions. But even now, this is going to be a very weird matchup. That's why I'm going to be picking the Browns against the spread. And this game could be close, but the way I see it, the Browns are explosive enough to really make this much like the last playoff game they played against each other. Remember that one where it would turn into a really weird shootout and there were so many turnovers, there were so many bizarre plays in that one. I could see this happening in this one. And this could definitely be like first one to like 45 points wins. And I think the Browns, if they get into that game style, could be the first one to 45. That's why I'm picking the Browns here, because they're just a fun team with an underdog mentality, never say die mentality now, that really can come to life against a divisional opponent and really make it difficult for them in this situation, just because of the fact that Jameis is unafraid. And that's sometimes all you need in a leader of your football team. If you're unafraid and if you're just willing to be free in how you play, then chances are your team plays relaxed as well and you can put up as many points as you want. But you also have to take your peaks with your valleys here. This could potentially be another one of those games where Jameis shoots himself in the foot a little bit, much like he did against Denver. But that's the excitement of this game, right? And so I have to pick in the excitement, getting caught up in the hype of it, the team most likely to add to that excitement, be the hype team in this matchup, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Let me know what you think about all these games in the comments below. They're all going to be very interesting heavyweight matchups. But coming up next, we're going to take a little look at the updated NFL MVP odds. I feel like this race is much more wide open than the Heisman, which makes it a lot more fun to analyze. So we'll be right back right after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and for our fourth segment of the day, why not look at some odds? We're wrapping up seasons here in both college football and the NFL. I know it certainly feels like it's not that time just yet, but this NFL season will be over before you even know it. So why not look at the updated NFL MVP odds, much like we did with the Heisman odds yesterday ahead of their conference championship weekend. And while we're a couple of weeks away from the conference championships of NFL season, this is a very interesting MVP race, right? Because we're giving a lot of players chances we never thought we would before, and a lot of positions chances we never would have expected. I would not have expected two running backs who are getting up there in age at a position that's not as highly coveted anymore in the NFL would be in this conversation. It just goes to show how bizarre the NFL can be year in, year out. And we're seeing historic performances by all these different guys, but at the end of the day, I feel like there are starting to be several players who are separating themselves from the pack. Without further ado, let's jump right into these updated NFL MVP odds. Now, mind you, they're not as updated as I would like. These were written, about a week ago now, so they could have changed over the last week of the NFL season. But without further ado, this is what I got for you. Put wrong graphic here. Starting off with number 5, this guy, not necessarily having the best of seasons, but he's in this discussion because he is who he is, and everyone knows that he can go on a heater to end the season. It's Patrick Mahomes. Whether you like it or not, he's always going to be in the MVP conversation, whether or not he's having an up or down year. And I feel like out of all these candidates, right, he's the one who could sneak up on you at the end of the season and really start to make the case for himself. And I know it's going to be really weird to see him, if he is in that conversation, potentially move up the betting odds, the betting ladder here. But at the end of the day, it is Patrick Mahomes still. And the brand alone, no matter the style of play, can get him to that position as well. So even if, say, he plays quote-unquote league average for the rest of the season, it could be enough to get him in the conversation just because of who he is, and that's why he sits here at number 5 as well. I don't like it as much as you might not like it, but it is what it is, because sometimes there are players who transcend, bad seasons, and Patrick Mahomes is one of them, and very few players can say that about themselves. So that is where he sits currently. Maybe not currently because the events of this weekend, but that was where he stands right now. And it is what it is, like I said. But number 4, this is where we get into kind of more top-level candidates. And this guy certainly doesn't seem like a top-level candidate just because he had one stinker performance and hasn't necessarily gotten the name recognition of other guys in this conversation. But Jared Goff, we have to give this guy his flowers. He's the quarterback of the best team in the NFL. And even though he's kicked in the dirt after his LA Rams campaign, and he kind of felt like used goods, he's found new life here in Detroit. And I feel like, until he gets back to the big game and potentially wins it, he's not going to get the respect of someone who's in an MVP conversation. But his season alone is enough to say that he really truly belongs. And so I feel like even though it's going to be weird to see how the NFL treats him. He should be a no-brainer candidate still. I feel like his efficiency is something that not many quarterbacks have, and his ability to stay within rhythm in that offense is truly something special. And I feel like even though he's not going to pad stats, he's not going to put up the gaudiest of numbers like the guys at the top of this list, the fact that he's being this efficient for the best offense in the NFL, the best team in the NFL, can't go unnoticed and can't go underappreciated in terms of MVP discussion. So even though he sits at number 4, this is a guy who I very well would not be shocked or appalled at should he win a shocking, to some, MVP award down the stretch, just because of the fact, he now needs to gain that respect. Potentially, he may not even do it this year. The Lions might not even win the Super Bowl, as hard as it is to try and digest. But overall, Jared Goff deserves to be in MVP conversations from here until, this Detroit Lion team mires in mediocrity again, because he's that special for this team. And number 3, though, this is a special player, and I'm shocked to see him this low, because for all intents and purposes, he could win this award. But because he's a running back, it's going to be difficult for him. Saquon Barkley, this guy's doing otherworldly things at the position, but he's a running back. And he's kind of an aging one at that, who just went to another team, a new home, to get more money in a year in which this could be potentially the last year we see a quote-unquote high-end running back make a move like this. And so that's why I feel like, even though Saquon certainly looks and feels like the best player in the NFL, the most important, most valuable player, for that matter, in the NFL, because he's a running back, and because these two guys have been in this situation before, have had MVP hype surrounding them before, this is going to be a difficult award for win for him. He's going to have to really challenge Eric Dickerson's single-season record here to really make a case, in my opinion, because it's always going to be tough. Only 2 running backs have won the award in the past 2 decades, Sean Alexander and Adrian Peterson, and they didn't even break records. So you really have to have a truly anomalous season at the running back position in order to be in the conversation. He's doing it right now at this current moment, and that's why he truly is firmly in the conversation. But in order to actually win it, yes, he's going to have to make history here. And it's going to be difficult down the stretch in terms of how the Eagles utilize him, especially if they've clinched a playoff spot by a certain point. But Saquon certainly should merit consideration as potential winner of this award. And finding him at 3 could be very surprising to some, just because a lot of people see him potentially as the number 1 guy for this award. But because of the running back position, that holds him back. And then at number 2, a guy who's all too familiar with being in this situation, but I don't necessarily should be in this spot just because of the fact his team has kind of slowed down a little bit. Lamar Jackson, I still think he deserves to be in this debate wholeheartedly. I still think he is doing incredible things with this, but 2 things slow him down. One, the fact that his team is not playing as well as it can, and because Derrick Henry as well complements him now in the backfield. And so, combined with all of this hype around the next guy on this list, and the fact that that guy is having a season like any he's ever had, Lamar is going to find it very difficult down the stretch to get back into this number 1 pick conversation. And so that's why, even though Saquon and this next guy could have cases against them, I feel like Lamar is not going to win this award. Just because I feel like this number 1 guy has something that Lamar doesn't this season. And the number 1 guy is, in fact, Josh Allen. And the one thing, funnily enough, that Josh Allen doesn't have this season is turnovers. That was always the problem with Josh Allen. He was a lot more fun than most of the candidates on this list to watch, and everybody loved him for it. But this season, the thing that separates him from all these other guys is turnovers. He limited that in an offense in which he kind of takes the back seat, which is the only way I can see him potentially being hindered in winning this award. But it allows him the freedom to make more decisive impacts on this team in terms of his play style. Because of the fact he's not always worried about hitting those deep balls, because of the fact there's no real deep threat in this team, because of the fact he has to play more within himself, it brings out the best in him. It limits the worst in him. And that's a combination for a guy who's already cemented himself as a superstar in this league to win his first MVP award. And even though a lot of people can make justifications for the guys behind him, Saquon, yes, if he makes history, he should definitely get this award. And we got to give Jared Goff his flowers finally. Josh Allen did what he needed to do this season to firmly entrench himself as the MVP of the National Football League. If you look at the team as well, compare this to Saquon a little bit, and Lamar, and even Jared Goff. Josh Allen is a very valuable player because I don't know where this Bills team would be without him. If you put, say, I don't know, a Mac Jones, a Trevor Lawrence, maybe even a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or Jaden Daniels with this Bills team, this Bills team might not even win 7 or 8 games. That's the point right here. Josh Allen has developed to this point to win this award. And that's something that not many people in this conversation can say. And he's doing it with less. And that's why I feel like this is a rightful place for Josh Allen to sit in the betting odds for the NFL MVP awards. But that will just about do it for this segment. Coming up next, our final segment, previewing Sunday Night Football, massive one in the AFC West. Chargers, Chiefs, going a little bit more into depth on that one right after this short break. Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and it should be a good one to close out today's show, previewing Sunday Night Football, a big one in the AFC West. The Chargers taking on the Chiefs. Kansas City 3.5 point favorites, minus 175 to win. LA plus 145, over under 43. And this one, like I suggested early on in today's show, could be a quote-unquote changing of the guard. I mean, not for the entirety of the game. We're going to see elements where the Chiefs certainly would feel like the worst team in this game. I feel like it's not necessarily, like I mentioned in my pick segment, going to hurt them in this one, and I think they'll eventually prevail and ultimately prevail in this one. But we're going to see moments, like I said, where the Chargers can get their thing going, and it's going to look better than the Chiefs. We're going to start to say, hey, we could potentially see the Chargers win the AFC West next year. That's what it's going to look like. But overall, when thinking about this game, I just see this Chargers team maybe get overawed too much in crucial moments to truly hurt this Chiefs team. Now, I know that the Chiefs have been playing pretty poorly against weaker opposition. They've had a lot of one-score games and games that you should feel they should dominate it in. Again, for example, the Panthers game, and this past weekend against the Raiders, or not a weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. Black Friday was that game, but ultimately, this Chiefs team certainly feels like it can get got on any given Sunday. And while the Chargers, certainly have the feel of a team that could upset them, I feel like the reason why I can't buy into it that much is obviously the run game, because J.K. Dobbins being injured truly does impact this team in a very negative manner, and we saw it against the Falcons in a game in which I thought would be much more exciting offensively, so to speak. But I do feel like there are going to be moments where we see the best out of the Chargers offense, and it's all going to start with Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert is no slouch without a run game. Yes, it kind of was a shock to his system perhaps in that game against Atlanta, because he is starting, like I said, to get used to what Jim Harbaugh wants out of him, to manage games a little bit more. But when we think about Justin Herbert and the reason why he's starting to become, in many people's minds, an elite quarterback and not just a pretty good one, is because of the fact that we've seen it before with Brandon Staley, where Justin Herbert, actually not Josh Herbert, actually had to play a lot more hero ball than he's playing now. Do it convincingly enough to say, hey, this guy's going to be something in the league. And this is perhaps the biggest game of his NFL career. Not to place too much emphasis on it, but I do feel like it is. Just because of the situation he's in and what he can do to really prove that the Chargers are going to be an AFC West contender for many years, potentially win the AFC West for many years down the stretch. And so that's why, even though this run game is not going to look as potent as it has in recent weeks, Justin Herbert has the opportunity to say that he can still prove to be a competent guy when you need him. And I know, that the Chargers are still going to try their best to employ Jim Harbaugh's philosophy in this one, because they invested a lot into changing how their offense looks. But I do feel like there are going to be moments in this game where Justin Herbert's going to make some timely throws that remind us of what he was doing under Brandon Staley. And not for nothing, I do feel this receiving corps starting to trust itself a little bit more. Ladd McConkey's really grown into potentially being Herbert's go-to target, a very timely receiver, especially on late downs. He can move the sticks in a timely manner. Not necessarily a yak monster, but a guy who can understand the position at a very high level and understand what his quarterback wants out of him as well. And then you have guys like Quentin Johnson and Joshua Palmer, who have underwhelmed throughout their careers here, but I feel like are still receivers who are reliable enough that Justin Herbert can trust them to make key plays down the stretch in this one. On the Chiefs side of things, the reason why I think they have just enough is because, yes, I mentioned that they weren't necessarily dominant in one metric or one aspect of their game. Their offense, defense, and special teams are all pretty middling at this point in the season. But the reason why I still think they're going to win this football match is because they're the Chiefs. And I know it sounds cliche to say that, and I know that eventually luck's going to run out for them again, and they're going to lose a game they potentially should have won. But I do feel like the Chargers right now are reeling a little bit, and the Chiefs are a better team than anyone at sensing that. And so that's why the Chiefs are going to dominate when it matters and ultimately win this football game. It's not going to be pretty yet again. It never is for this iteration of the Chiefs. But I do feel like there are moments to be had for the Chiefs in terms of just gaining the upper hand in this one, just enough to pull it out. And so that's why I always have to look at this Chiefs team and respect them enough to say they're capable of beating anybody and they're capable of beating themselves. And that's the only way they're going to lose, if they beat themselves And while the Chargers can pose a threat there in terms of forcing mistakes from them, I still feel like they're not going to do as much as we think with it. I think that this offense, if it relies too much on Justin Herbert early on, the pressure's going to catch up to him. And the Chiefs can prove more than anyone that they can close with their defense in a more potent fashion than anyone in the NFL. And that's why that scares me. Because Justin Herbert can play hero ball for 3 quarters straight and potentially have the lead late in the fourth. And then on an important drive, throw an important pick and the Chiefs come down and kick a field goal on him. That could really be the game script. And so that's why I'm always worried when I feel like a team has a shot to upset the Chiefs. The Chiefs always find a way. And so I want to give more respect to the Chargers here, but ultimately I think the Chiefs can cover this one. And then in terms of how the coaches and how game plans could come into this, I feel like Jim Harbaugh is going to be a little bit too overambitious in trying to find some semblance of a running game here. But ultimately, his insistence on trying to maintain that running game could come back to bite them late on. Because late in the game, I feel like the Chiefs had this ability to drag you into what they want. And so I can sense a period where Jim Harbaugh might not be as sharp in play calling and his offense stagnates as a result late in this one, whereas Steve Spagnuolo and his defense are always on their game. Spags always has a plan for every down of every game. And that's what scares me for the Chargers here, because Justin Herbert's going to have to do a lot of processing at the line. And he's going to have to know when to audible a play, when to improvise, and when to stay within structure. Because this Chiefs team is going to smell blood from the moment you let your head down. And so that's why I can't necessarily persuade myself that if the Chargers get into an opportunity where they have a chance to win the football game, they're going to take it. Because as much as I love what Jim Harbaugh's done to this team, potentially going to win Coach of the Year when all is said and done, there is a moment where you're going to have to let stubbornness fall to the wayside. I'm not sure that he's going to be willing to do that, even with that injury crisis in his backfield. And so that's where Steve Spagnuolo is going to sense he can pounce with his defense. And as much as Justin Herbert, and I feel will have a fantastic game here, take care of the football, be as efficient as possible, and ultimately not put your team up against a wall, it's going to be for naught because of the fact that the Chiefs are going to win it anyways. And I know that I'm rambling on, and it sounds, like I'm going in circles over and over again, but that's what the Chiefs do to you. They lull you into talking about them in a way that is repetitive, because they are repetitive. Because end result, more often than not, for the Chiefs is repeating winning every single time. And when you find a team that's consistent, that's all you can say about them. No matter how good or bad they play, chances are winners win. And that's what stands out to me in this Chiefs team. Yes, they're a lot more vulnerable than past iterations of this team. But the Chargers are in a situation here where they're still the hunter. They're not the hunter just yet, like I suggested. And in this matchup, when you're the hunted and you just suffered a significant injury in your team and it impacts your coach's play style, and thus it could impact how this game plays out, chances are the Chiefs are going to take advantage of it. It's that simple. One weakness, and the Chiefs are on to you. And that's all it takes for the Chargers to tighten up a little bit and get out of the side of their game. But I still think there are going to be moments where we can't ignore what the Chargers are becoming, because they're becoming a very special football team. They're believing and buying into Jim Harbaugh, for better or for worse. We'll find out in the future. But overall, this Chargers team cannot be ignored. But I still have to stick with my guns here and say the Chiefs will find a way to win. It's a divisional game. It's going to be tough. But like we saw with that blocked field goal against the Broncos, they just find ways. We saw in that game against the Bucs, they just find ways. We saw in overtime against the Panthers, they just find ways. And no matter what, no matter if it pisses you off or not, the Chiefs are always going to be at the top of the pedestal come season's end. It's what winners do. And the Chargers just aren't there just yet. Let me know what you think about this game in the comments below, because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard, your faithful host. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow to conclude the week here on 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network. Also, make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Other than that, I am out for today.